Well, to me, this treaty sounds like a military-industrial complex treaty because outside of nation states, the military-industrial complex doesn't necessarily play that game.
We don't know what discoveries could be found in Antarctica. And it's like the Wild West down there. Anything could be found. Any claims could be made.
In the data, what we see is we get this kind of like a plasma arc that moves through the Earth.
So where did this 3 miles of ice sheet, freshwater ice sheet, come from?
Fighting Nazi UFOs with nuclear weapons in the late 1950s, early 60s around South Africa.
Sounds like a great story.
That's a new one.
I love that we can bring stuff up on this show, and then your reaction is, I'm going to find out about this for next week.
Right.
And welcome back to the Metaphysical Podcast. In the last episode, we started talking about the frozen wasteland of Antarctica, or is it? We've all heard crazy rumors of more technology, secret research operations, bases, and even UFOs hiding in the barren continent. But what's the truth? Is there a reason that Antarctica is almost completely off limits to the civilians of the world, and why countries in competition with each other have all peacefully agreed, magically, to a sacred Antarctic treaty sharing the land? Well, we're going to talk about the data, rumors, and more today. So join remote viewer John Vivanco and investigative researcher Rob Counts for a show that's out of this world.
And if you're listening to us, the Metaphysical Podcast, or you're watching us on a video platform, go ahead and just leave us a 5-star review. Truly appreciate it. It's going to help us reach more people, spread like a virus. Make sure you like and subscribe wherever you're watching us.
I like to think of the Metaphysical Podcast spreading like a virus. Those were good imagery right there.
Good imagery.
Just kidding. Yeah. Last episode, you guys, we discussed a lot of general data on Antarctica, and even kind of general whistleblower claims and rumors that have, I think, really captivated people around the world for years now. And in this episode, we're going to get into the nitty-gritty a little bit more about really why Antarctica is off limits to most civilians. What are these reasons? And why Antarctica flash froze, which seems to be the case. We'll also be getting into weapons of mass destruction near Antarctica, and this Antarctic Treaty. So also, what does it take to go down into Antarctica, which John asked in the last episode? So why don't we start there, I think, just because.
All right, so I'm launching my boat from the Strait of Magellan, and I've got a snowmobile on it. I've got a tent. I've got a propane heater, and I'm going to just land in Antarctica. What's going to happen? How do I do that? Do I need my passport?
First of all, I don't think this is like a trip into the countryside, but so it's a lot more complicated than that, it seems. Every single trip has to be reported to the Department of State, who then they inform, this is tour group info, mind you. Okay. So for everybody listening to this is information that we scraped from basically the sites that are promoting these trips down here. Right. So you report the trip to the Department of State, who then informs every other country in the Antarctic Treaty about your trip. What other tourism industry really works that way? I mean, think about it. No one. That's really very strange. Like if you're going to Italy, that's not going to happen. Okay, so if you go to Antarctica with a tour group, you'd really better stay with the group, because according to one travel agency, don't expect to get rescued with the limited amount of resources and personnel. They say that saving just one person who strayed from the tour group is more trouble than it's worth. Is that a threat or a promise? All right, so the other thing is you also cannot take anything from Antarctica. One travel agency says, and I quote, "If you happen to find anything of scientific interest, a fossil, for example, Note the location, take a picture, and then leave it there. A scientist can get much more out of that fossil than you can. So you're admitting that there are fossils down there.
Well, yeah, I mean, you would definitely find those on the coast where you've got tundra for sure.
Sure, on the coast. But what else?
Yeah,
What else?
but I mean, unless you fell in an ice hole somewhere inland, you're not going to see much.
Or fell into a hidden cave
Yeah,
and started hanging out with Lemurians or Wagas or something.
right. I'm guessing Mount Vinson, where people can go to hiking. I'm guessing, you can find stuff there, fossils.
There are birds that go down there in the summertime, aren't there? I mean, I would imagine there are.
Yeah, along the coast for sure. Yeah, along the coast.
How close, do
Seabird.
you know, John? How close is the Strait of Magellan to Antarctica? Is it
It's not.
close?
I don't know the mileage. I don't know the kilometers, but it is not that far. Not that far. There are some excursions down there from that area, from the Patagonia, where you can hit some of the islands right off Antarctica. But I don't know if they will take you straight to Antarctica unless you're part of that sanctioned tour
Mm.
that you were speaking about. So yeah, I don't know. I've been hiking down through the area through Patagonia, way down at the end there, and it's pretty insane because you're talking about yeah. I've been trekking through that area in the past, and you're confronted with even midsummer just ice and tundra. It's like really unforgiving environment. So,
You really,
yeah.
yeah, you forget, like, when you think of South America. I mean, South America is massive. It's long, right? But you always think of these tropical, like, canopy trees and stuff like that, jungle,
Right.
whatever.
Yeah.
You get down
Right.
there and you're in like Canada, the opposite, you
Oh
know.
yeah. Yeah. You're. I mean, there's no very little vegetation, no trees, nothing down there, just tundra, just
Well,
rocks.
and we didn't cover this in the last episode, but Antarctica is known to be desert, very desert like. There's hardly any rain at all. And yet it is a gigantic, massive freshwater, frozen well almost, It's not really that straightforward to go down there. I mean, I don't think you're not going to successfully jump on a boat and head down to Antarctica on your own. There's going to be people that find you. You're better off going with one of these, and it kind of
Yeah.
brings
No,
this.
it's just kind of foolish as well. It's
It
my
is,
guess.
yeah.
I
And
mean,
so
you talking about the temperatures. We were talking about the temperatures in the last episode. It's just no. It's just not going to happen,
I
guys.
actually would love to do this. This guy is doing a cold plunge
Yeah.
in in Antarctic waters, and I think that would be good for you.
Yeah. The old Wim Hof thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was watching this really interesting video. There'll be sometimes these clips of old doctors talking on television and somebody interviewing them, and this guy was saying that he was eating for the first time. The interviewer said, "Oh, well, is this your first meal of the day?" And it was dinner time. The guy was like, "Yeah, I didn't eat breakfast or lunch." And he was like, "Well, why didn't you do that?" And he was like, "Well," he's like, "think about it. At every stage of history, people have stayed young by challenging their bodies, not kind of over processing all the time."
Right.
And he's like, if you now, this isn't me saying this is the video that I watched, but he was basically alluding to making your body have to work more is much healthier for it than constantly giving it what it requires all the time, which seems antithetical to that whole thing. But it was a very interesting philosophy, especially the way that he was describing it. So what he was, and there is some evidence of that, and some of this, like, intermittent fasting is like really good for you. It helps you burn fat, like all of this different stuff. But yeah, cold plunges are one of these things, like plunging your body into cold water. It's supposed to have extreme health benefits. It's supposed to help raise men's testosterone. There's all of these other studies along with this. And then you've got Wim Hof, who, has his own research and everything with cold plunges and breathing and all of this stuff.
So an Antarctica excursion is not out of the question.
It's not. I think we should maybe go for that at some point.
Fund the expedition. Yeah.
Right, right. Have you ever done a cold plunge like this in the ice?
No, I haven't done that. No,
Mm.
not fond of that. But you know, like Wim Hof, his a lot of his stuff, the breathing techniques come from like Tumo, a Tibetan practice. He just kind of formed it into his own thing for his own purposes. But this is like ancient stuff, you know, where ancient meditators had that secret knowledge and they would use it for their benefit, whether it's to keep themselves warm in the snow or cool themselves down or just general healing. And I got to say, I mean, you know, Wim Hof, Tumo, Kundalini, you know, Breath of Fire, even though a lot of people feel it can be dangerous for you in raising your Kundalini type energy through your body too fast and cause damage, I've always found it to be really beneficial.
Mm. I mean, a lot of people will say that, actually,
They
just what
will,
you just
yeah.
said. Yeah,
I just wanted to, you know, make that disclaimer.
sure, of
Your own,
course.
do it at your own risk if you're going to do it.
But I think this discussion about oxygen, even with Wim Hof, is really interesting to bring up when we're talking about Antarctica, because when we start discussing Antarctica and its unavailability to most civilians,
Right.
we're really kind of talking about here is a barren iceland with solid evidence of the conditions on planet Earth millions of years ago, which would give scientists or countries a lot of data on what the planet actually was like in the past, how much oxygen actually was available on the planet, or, you know, what the pressures were like. And then you start getting into, I'd be thinking about this a lot recently, but like, what would extra oxygen do? Like, how would extra oxygen and pressures actually help? And then you get into the discussion of hyperbaric chambers. You know, Wim Hof, what he's doing in a way is, of course, it's extra oxygen, not necessarily extra pressures, but the extra oxygen can go a long way in helping your body recover. Where, and in the past, with some of these theories about the extra oxygen, this is why dinosaurs, their nostril size was so small, is they didn't need to work as hard to breathe in more oxygen to get what they needed for their bodies, and everything back in this time allegedly grew much greater in size. um, the beasts were larger, the people lived longer. So then now you're getting
There
into
were
biblical
giants, giant people. Yeah.
giants, people,
It makes
giant
me
people.
wonder if I mean, I don't know. I'm sure people have speculated on this quite a bit. If the gravity was different somehow, some way, I have
Well,
no idea if
yeah,
that
I
can
mean, and we
really,
don't
if
know.
that's a thing. Yeah.
We don't necessarily know, but the oxygen itself, if there was that much oxygen, may have a different impact on how your body handles the oxygen. We don't,
Right.
and what I mean by that, I'm sorry, handles the gravity rather. So how your body handles the gravity, because if your body is growing stronger and better, then, you know, maybe the gravity isn't having as much of a pull on your body in the same way.
Right.
These hyperbaric chambers, if you put, for instance, a plant in a hyperbaric chamber, the plant, like a tomato plant, will grow 5 times more tomatoes, and it will grow much bigger, almost into a tree, like that kind of a difference. And whereas if it's just in a normal environment, it's going to grow and appear more like a normal tomato vine.
Right.
So, you know, this is not me saying this, guys. You can easily find these experiments yourself out there just by going and looking and researching hyperbaric chambers. But it's like that. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because this information that's so interesting that we're talking about is contained within the ice of Antarctica, which would, to me, really explain why largely this continent is off limits to most people. we we don't know what discoveries could be found in Antarctica. And it's like the Wild West down there. Anything could be found, any claims could be made. As much as that's disappointing, I can also see the why certain agendas would want to keep us from finding these things.
Yeah. I mean, the whole continent more or less is classified, really. And I mean, that's what we've seen with our data is that it literally has to do with, oh, I mean, on the surface level, you've got, look, it's really dangerous to just go there. It's
Yeah.
really dangerous. So that is going to be one of the number one things. You just don't want people to show up on the shore with boats. You know, a lot of people are going to die in that scenario.
Even if you're equipped, something could
Even
go
if you're
wrong in those
equipped.
conditions.
I mean, when you listen to Eric Hecker, if you listen to this guy Eric Hecker in the disclosure conference, and you can find it on YouTube, he will tell you how dangerous it is there. Absolutely dangerous, even for total preparation. One thing goes wrong, and you're done. That's it. So I mean, there's that surface reason. Um, but with the data on this, it's literally what you're talking about. But not knowing what is under there, but having a simple understanding of what's there and keeping it from the public. But all this began back in the 1950s
Mhm.
after Operation High Jump. All of that began after that because that's when they discovered some very strange things. That's when it became classified at that point.
So, okay, so we're at the point where this treaty is now. We're in our discussion because you're talking about what happened after Operation High Jump. So
Right.
at the end of that, in about 1958, 1959, I think, the Antarctic Treaty is signed by a bunch of different countries, right? And the Antarctic Treaty is an anomaly among treaties in a way because to have the to have a bunch of countries all agreeing on something is not very normal. And they seem to be doing it in the name of science here. So, Lindsay, you can pull up this Antarctic Treaty website where it kind of goes over this, right? So here it is. The Antarctic Treaty was signed in Washington on 1st of December 1959 by the 12 countries whose scientists had been active in and around Antarctica during the International Geophysical Year of 1957 and 1958. Okay, now there are a few important points to the treaty that I think they're most relevant to the discussion. And it is on this website as well. It says the Antarctica shall be used for peaceful purposes only. This is what everyone's agreed to, these 12 countries. Freedom of scientific investigation in Antarctica and cooperation toward that end shall continue. Scientific observations and results from Antarctica shall be exchanged and made freely available, which I do not believe at all. Now, among the signatories of the treaty were 7 countries: Argentina, Australia, Chile, France, New Zealand, Norway, and the United Kingdom, with territorial claims sometimes overlapping. Other countries do not recognize any claims. So, like the US and Russia, for instance, maintain a basis of claim. All positions are explicitly protected in Article 4 here. Yeah. And this is a map of where the claims and for who these claims belong. And you can see, let's see here. I don't see the United States on
No,
here.
United States is not in there because I think that's the part of the Antarctic Treaty, and I don't think the U.S. is necessarily involved with that, are they?
Yeah, no, I think the US has signed this as well.
Oh, okay.
They would have had to. Like, they were probably the ones that created the treaty.
Well, to me, this treaty sounds like a military industrial complex treaty because outside of nation states, the military industrial complex doesn't necessarily play that game. They're on a layer below all of that, and they don't necessarily care about the nation state thing. So to me, this sounds like an military industrial complex situation creation, which is interesting. Do you remember back in 1987, Ronald Reagan, who was the president of the United States then, went before the UN and said something like, what if the world was threatened by an alien force, something from space, and we would become one in that? I mean, he went, and we should do that now. Like, we should become one now. All our differences will go away.
In our obsession with antagonisms of the moment, we often forget how much unites all the members of humanity. Perhaps we need some outside universal threat to make us recognize this common bound. I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. And yet, I ask you, is not an alien force already among us? What could be more alien to the universal aspirations of our peoples than war and the threat of war?
If an alien force came at us, we would have to become one. All of our differences would fade. Is this what's happening in Antarctica?
Yeah.
Is this what the treaty's about?
Yeah, it would be us versus them, the collective us versus them. Yeah, and yes, indeed, United Kingdom, the United States, and USSR have all signed the part of the 12 nations, and it was signed on December 1st, 1959. You know, an agreement between it makes sense at the time, especially in 1959, even though all of this stuff was going down with Russia. There's a lot going down between Russia and the United States back then. Right. Think about it. For them to both sign this treaty, it's kind of strange. But I think a lot of people aren't aware of the joint scientific research that the US and the USSR had been doing, even with the Cold War going on. There was a lot more than you'd think. I think the two biggest powers, or some of the biggest powers in scientific research back then, would have definitely been the US, the USSR, and the UK. So they're all on the treaty. They're all potentially down here screwing around on the continent of Antarctica, finding who knows what, doing who knows what. And, we will get into, hey, was there anything going on down there during the Operation High Jump episode, I think. Oh, so was Antarctica flash frozen?
Oh, right. Well, so, I don't know about that. Any theory on that is just a theory. I mean, backed by probably a little scientific data, but, geology, deep past in geology and the way the Earth works is really just theories. We looked at how the mammoth were flash frozen in Siberia. It's like we looked at that with remote viewing. Mm-hmm. And if there are mammoth there that were flash frozen, I don't know, I've never heard of that. It would be the same thing. So in the data on that, it's a little bit hard to figure out. But what I can kind of glean from the data on the flash freezing is that there's a period of cataclysm occurring on the Earth, and there is a situation where you have Earth's magnetic field moving. Okay, like the poles are moving. It's like a pole shift type of situation, potentially an unlocking of the crust from the mantle, so that it can move around, and as well as intense electromagnetic discharges occurring because of something happening in space, whether that's another body moving by the Earth. This gets into the whole like electrical universe theory, where the universe is electrical. Planets are electrical bodies in a sense, that aspect, and they can interact with each other, their magnetic fields. And so in the data, what we see is we get this like kind of like a plasma arc that moves through the Earth. It goes from one side to the other. It's like the Earth changes and the Earth changes poles.
So
and
this is a pole shift energetic burst, almost.
Shift energetic. But it's a little bit more than that, because our pole makes these excursions, and it's doing it right now. We don't really know. I mean, sometimes we could probably have shifts really quick that go back and forth that don't do anything. Sometimes they could be very cataclysmic. And so what we see is that when we have a very extreme event occur, the atmosphere collapses So we live in the troposphere, and the troposphere is where our weather occurs for the most part. The clouds come in, it's the air we breathe. Above that's the stratosphere, and that's very cold. So where you find the cirrus clouds, ice crystals. And what we see is that there is a collapsing of that onto the surface as the magnetic field fluctuates, as well as this what looks like a arc of electricity in certain areas, plasma arc, because we're getting like into the whole electrical universe theory, and something happening to the Earth in that process. And I'm not sure what caused it, but literally that's what we see: a collapsing of the atmosphere, as well as this electrical discharge that could be sort of a cold plasma. And I think that Ben Davidson has he's the only one, Ben Davidson, who does suspicious observers. You can look at him up on YouTube. He's the only one that I've seen kind of begin to explain what our data describes on what could potentially happen theoretically when we have that sort of a pole shift. And he specifically talks about this idea that there's a sucking in of cold plasma into certain locations, as well as the atmosphere collapsing. And that's like literally the direction that our data goes. So if there is any frozen mammoths there in Antarctica, flash frozen, that's likely the explanation for it, something along that line. And, I know they did experiments too on the ones in Siberia. Like they brought in like refrigeration experts to try to understand, how did these things get so cold so fast? Because you're talking about a massive creature,
dude,
with a lot of flesh.
Yeah. Flash freezing is like
Right. And literally it's got undigested food in its stomach and its mouth. That would have to freeze so fast. And they couldn't figure out how that happened conventionally at all.
It's like liquid nitrogen fast.
Right. It's so fast. They even came up with a concept, the idea of, well, what if the atmosphere went away and space, just space, the coldness of space came in. And they couldn't even come to the conclusion that could do it. So this other idea about cold plasma that is being created, or a reaction is occurring through a pole shift and something interfering with our magnetic field that could create a cold plasma, seems to be more on the side of what we see in the data. Like I say, it's hard to figure out with remote viewing, because these are concepts that not a lot of people talk about, nor we know a lot about it at all. Virtually nothing.
Well, and I think when, that was a very interesting theory, but then when you start really digesting the fact that we're talking about an ice shelf that's almost 3 miles thick, a mile to 3 miles thick, like
Right.
over Antarctica, how does that happen? I understand that Antarctica is a very cold place and it would maintain the frozen water, but how do you accumulate that much when there's no rain down there? Even
right,
there's no rain in it. It's not like it's accumulating every year, people. Maybe at some point it was.
Well, I mean, the water had to come from somewhere.
From somewhere.
It's not building up, right? It's not building up. It's just, but it came from somewhere.
Have you heard of the canopy theory?
No, I haven't.
So, creationist theory, right? Where you're trying to understand how Noah's flood happened. And this theory was that there was an enormous amount of water above, I guess, contained in the atmosphere. And then at a certain point, this water actually the water itself was the explanation for the pressure and the extra oxygen. And at a certain point, when it was deemed, I guess in this theory, like when it was meant to happen, it just came down all at once, basically created Noah's flood. And now you have like the ocean levels rose very far. Now in that part, if we're talking about rainwater, it's very possible. And then in this part of Antarctica, that accumulated as just miles of fresh water, which is
Right.
why there's that much fresh water, right? Like, could the canopy or Antarctica be evidence of the canopy theory? You know, a lot of people say, oh, the canopy theory is debunked. I'm fine with that, but I'm kind of more interested in having this discussion about what it could possibly be than I am about what scientists think is debunked and what isn't,
Right.
because who knows
Right.
really, you know?
Right. Right. I mean, I could be at any number of these things. I have no idea. I haven't looked into that. I mean, the previous stuff that we looked into with regard to the flash freezing is like it's really difficult to figure out with remote viewing, and we could just get like little indications of what happened and then do research around it to see if any theories line up with it. And so even then it's like who knows? Who knows? So the canopy theory could be something, absolutely. There's also the idea potentially that the crust unlocks from the mantle during these periods. So that's another idea where the crust unlocks from the mantle and it slides around on the earth, kind of sloshes a little bit. And it could be that Antarctica was, up higher somewhere else, and as the crust moved, I mean totally different weather patterns as well. And as the crust slid down to where it is, where Antarctica is now, it could have had a totally different weather pattern, where it built up and accumulated over that catastrophic period. But that would be a ton of water, because how much percent of the world's water is locked up in that? I mean, what did you say it was? It was like
Yeah, it was like 70% of the Earth's
70%. I mean,
fresh
wow.
water.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so much. I mean, think about it. Like when you really start thinking about that, it's that itself, just even thinking about those figures doesn't add up.
No, it doesn't add up.
That's like that.
I mean, it's such a simple thing. It's like, where did that ice come from? It's not accumulating, right?
No,
It's
but
not
you
like it's
think,
snowing there all the time. Well, no, I mean it
no,
is, right?
no,
Isn't it? It's
no,
got to be.
no, there is no, it's desert-like conditions. There's hardly any rain every year. And Lindsay could probably bring up the amount of rain that falls on Antarctica per year, but we're talking about conditions that make no sense with what's actually there right now.
Right. Right. Unless we're talking about millions and millions of years of buildup somehow.
Okay, even still, with the amount of rain that's falling there, according to what's going on right now, that's not. We're talking about the harsh when it's extremely cold and harsh, you don't have rain, and the rain. Look, only 2 inches per year.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
Driest place on Earth. Driest place on Earth. So where did this 3 miles of ice sheet, freshwater ice sheet, come from? I don't understand why this question isn't being brought up more, you know? And it's only when you're researching this stuff and you start like actually thinking things through where you just can't get past certain things. Like a lot of people are like, well, are there UFOs down there? And I'm just like, why is this
Where
ice
does the
shelf
ice,
so
where
big?
did the ice come from?
I'm sure there's technology, but can we talk about this first? Because
Right.
it's
Right.
really, really strange.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I had not thought of that. I had not thought of that. That's a really good research point.
It's just strange. And that's why I like doing you research the surface data on something and you're likely to find even more bizarre things than the conspiracy theories or the rumors.
Right.
Look at the moon. The moon
Yeah.
is another similar example of that. Just by researching surface data on the moon, you will be completely baffled
Yeah.
at what is going on there.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
even prominent scientists are baffled.
yeah, now I'll bring one thing up before we end this episode that I think is very bizarre and that I kind of want to get your opinion on. I think it was in 1958. There were a couple of nukes that got put off just below South Africa or near South Africa, close to Antarctica, between South Africa and Antarctica. Now, it's claimed that these nukes were it was a experiment, some type of experiment. They were put off in the air.
Did South Africa government set them off?
No, this was the U.S., I believe.
U.S. Okay.
Now here it says from 1960s to the 1990s, South Africa pursued research into the weapons of mass destruction, including nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons under the apartheid government.
Apartheid. Yeah.
Apartheid, thanks.
Apartheid.
Apartheid. 6 nuclear weapons were assembled. Now, I'm quite sure that I don't think were these tested by South Africa, or were these tests by the Americans? I was under the impression from my research that these nukes that went off in the air were American nukes, and the information was released 3 years later in 1961 that they had gone off. So it wasn't even really widely known or discussed that this had been done until, and now I don't even know what would that do to our atmosphere. Like, you blow one of those
is this one of the tests that they were doing in the ionosphere? Because that, I know that they did some tests where they were setting off nuclear weapons like really high up in the ionosphere. I think it was the ionosphere, to see what it would do, which probably would create some kind of 0 point situation and just kind of light up the whole ionosphere. But that happened down there. Interesting. So what's the conspiracy around this?
Well, I think that this added to conspiracy theories about the now, when we're talking about the already, circulating rumors about Nazis down there, Operation High Jump, and all of this stuff. So Lindsay is not seeing any information about the United States being involved in this, just South Africa's program. However, what I'm discussing could be a part of the rumor mill that's going around, along with Operation High Jump and all of that stuff. So it is relevant because people are constantly talking about what really happened down in Antarctica, or what's going on down in Antarctica, especially with Operation High Jump. So the name of the program where they were experimenting with nukes was called Operation Argus. These bombs, I guess, were shot into the air and blown up. And now, again, the reason why this is relevant is, why do that type of experimentation unless you were really aiming at something, right? And then also, it's kind of a crappy move to do this even anywhere near a place that had population like South Africa. Of course, where on earth can you go to do these tests? I don't think there's any good place, Yeah, why do the tests at all, really, is the question. So this has kind of led speculation around these nuclear bombs that were secret, that they were doing secret experimentation on from 1958 to 1961, that they were actually aiming them at something. It wasn't for no reason. And this has kind of pushed this theory forward that Nazis had advanced technology, that we're still fighting Nazis. I mean, look at all the books that came out in the 50s and the 60s. It was always fighting Nazis, and it was always like these sensational reworks of this type of thing in these different novels that had come out. Some people thinking that there could be truth to it. Some people thinking, obviously, that it was complete science fiction.
Well, I'm fighting Nazi UFOs with nuclear weapons in the late 1950s, early 60s around South Africa.
Sounds like a great story.
That's a new one. I don't know. Or aliens or whatever. I don't think that's going to do. I don't think nuclear weapons are going to do much against, the alien force. Or, I mean, even then, if the Nazis had actually developed UFOs or anti-gravity type things like we see the UAPs right now, I mean, I just don't think that nuclear weapons are going to necessarily have that much of an impact, seeing as how those things can move.
I'll tell you something interesting that I heard last night. We published an episode on Rise TV where Ben had interviewed, what was his name, Lindsay? Michael
Schratt.
Michael Schratt. after, some of these whistleblowers like Grush and Heckler came out, he was showing a bunch of data, historical data on the different UAPs that they had found that have been thoroughly kind of vetted in the 1940s and 50s and all of this stuff. Now, this particular UAP that's in the thumbnail was brought up, and it was claimed to have been in the custody of the military for a very long time, where they were trying to break into this thing. And no matter what they would do year over year, they could not get into this thing. Like lasers. You're talking about like lasers couldn't even break the metal that was on this thing, allegedly, right?
Yeah.
But he mentioned something interesting, was that one of their methods of trying to get in was this extreme conditions where they would drop this into pure liquid nitrogen and then pull it up so that the metal became more brittle and then try to break in.
Right.
So my point is, they were using diamond tip drills. They were using lasers. None of them did anything. Diamonds are the hardest thing we have on the planet. Is that all right? Now, if nitrogen worked, liquid nitrogen, if that did indeed work to get in, is it possible that extreme temperatures, nuclear type temperatures, we're talking about like as hot as the sun temperatures, could have some type of effect on this technology? And that's why they decided to use nukes. Also, there are different, I don't know enough about nuclear technology, and I don't want everyone to come after me, but there could be things with the nuclear technology that could have a potential effect on technology that's alien like this. And I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I mean, okay, so I honestly don't think that you're going to have much of an impact on these craft, because I know, like, with that whistleblower that Ben interviewed, I don't think that those methods they used did much of anything to it. So I highly doubt it. I highly doubt it. Um, it could. I mean, maybe the heat could, but I don't know. We've never looked into any of that, but my intuition is saying, yeah, maybe not, maybe not. What you're talking about is a slow moving missile compared to the speed of those craft, for one thing, right? And these craft can quickly move outside of it. And, we've even seen that, the technology that went into the Montauk project was in part a technology that is used on these craft to slip outside of our dimension into the upside down and then come back, right? And so there's that aspect as well. Whether it's Nazis or aliens, I have no idea. So I feel a little doubtful about it, because I know that these scientists will do things just because they can. Hey, let's just see what happens if we ignite the upper atmosphere. Let's see if we can do something there, because we can. So, but then again, I mean, that is kind of strange. It's like, how many other times in history have they done that? Because, like, seriously, setting off nuclear weapons in the ionosphere or stratosphere could create a 0 point energy situation, because there's a lot of energy in, like, the ionosphere, for instance. And if you could ignite that energy, you could create a massive fireball that just eats up the ionosphere across the whole Earth. So that's a little bit dangerous.
Yeah, I would say that's pretty dangerous. Yes.
So you've got to wonder that literally, that right there kind of actually makes me wonder if they were going after a threat, because otherwise,
right.
why would you do that?
Why would you do that? But also, when we're thinking about the 1940s and the 1950s, you're dealing with an enemy that you don't understand. You can't understand. You have no way of understanding their technology, and you're like, well, let's throw our biggest thing at it. Let's throw our biggest weapon at it.
Let's see what happens.
Yeah. And according to Michael Schraft too, he made this point that our military is rather I think you might have used the word brutal in its like how it attempts or how it kind of interfaces with these problems. It's like, well, we don't know anything about it, so take it out. So I
Right.
don't think that like they wouldn't be like, well, let's try this. Let's try negotiation. It would be like, let's end this threat right now because we don't know what it is.
Right.
That would be the strategy. So I can see that decision being made to use a nuke up there if it was something that crazy. And
Right.
this is why we're doing this entire series on Antarctica, because what is really going on down there and what has gone on. I mean, that alone, Operation Argus with the nukes, it's so interesting. And I think it then makes sense why people would see uh Admiral Byrd's diary, where these beings come up to him and tell him, hey, your people have to be really careful with these nukes that they're using. Send a message back to everyone. And why it makes sense, because human beings really should be careful with these things, right? Now, I'm not claiming that Admiral Byrd's diary was true. I'm simply stating why I think people believe it is because I think all of us in the back of our heads are thinking, hey, human beings really probably shouldn't be dabbling with technologies that are this great, that are bigger than them, and that we've been, I think, completely irresponsible with using in the first place.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I'm going to actually, something that I'm going to have a look into, try and see if, what was it that they were doing? Was it a legit scientific experiment or was it something else?
I love that we can bring stuff up on this show, and then your reaction is, I'm going to find out about this for next week.
Right.
This show's great. Well, you guys, we're out of time for this episode. It was really fun to talk about all of this stuff, actually, and I think explore what's going on in Antarctica a little bit more, and bring some more theories forward as to why Antarctica is the weird place that it is and what could potentially be there. In our next episode, we are going to be getting into Operation High Jump and the details, what's been said and what really happened. And at the end of that episode, I think it's pretty safe to say that we're going to be able to reveal to you guys what actually happened. We'll also be getting into Nazis, of course, and all of the history down there, which Operation High Jump was reportedly for. So if you're excited about all of that stuff, definitely hang in there. I hope you guys are enjoying this series on Antarctica so far. And if you guys have any comments, we really want to hear what you guys think. We want to hear your theories. We also want to hear what you guys want us to talk about in future episodes. So don't be shy. Comment below. And John, thanks so much for being with us. And I hope you guys thought this episode was as out of this world as we did. See y'all next time.